Well, thank you again. My name is Goto Butler. I'm from the University of Pennsylvania. So I'm going to talk about possibilities and challenges of using digital technologies in pre-primary language learning. I was told that many of you are researchers, so I decided to focus on ethical considerations for research today. Well, when you conduct research concerning digital technology among young learners, ethical issues became very complicated. I must say that we have many unsolved ethical issues, but I think it's important to raise our awareness on ethical issues and then create some space so that we can exchange ideas and views. So here's the main question for today's talk. How do we, adult educators and researchers, ethically integrate digital technology into additional language learning for very young children? And today I'm going to children defined as children younger than 6. So here's the outline of today's talk. In the introduction section, I'm going to talk about who are very young learners so we can be on the same page. And in addition, I'd like to quickly remind ourselves critical components for human communication. Whether we use technology or not, regardless of what technology use, these components should be secured. In the section 2, I'm going to conduct an overview of existing research on digital technologies and language learning. I'm going to talk about both monolingual and multilingual cases. And in the section 3, I'm going to discuss key elements for ethical integration of digital technologies. And I'm going to propose 5 issues to think about, and followed by a conclusion. So that's our outline today. So first introduction. Who are very young children? Children under the age of 6. So as we know very well, the children nowadays are growing up with digital technology. This photo actually came up in 2014. When this one came out, I thought about, oh my God, what kind of a world that we are getting into. But basically, we have been talking about children's early exposure to digital technology for quite some time. And then here's the survey data from the US that I found recently. It lists major digital technologies and the percentage that different age groups of children use these devices. So for example, if you look at children aged 5 to 7, and 92% of them watch TV, and 81% of them use a tablet, and 58% use smartphones, right? What do you think about this? Is the picture similar to the context that you're familiar with? I assume that in most, at least in developed countries, the picture is by and large probably similar. And of course, children are in the midst of various developments. So brain and then their body develop very quickly during the time. And for example, at birth, their brain is about 25% of adults' weight. But by age 5, it reaches about 90% of its adult size. Also, when we are born, we have many more synapses that we need. And around age 3 to 6, unused synapses are eliminated to increase efficiency. So this process is guided by experience. Early enrichment and responsive caregiving really strongly influence a neural organization. Now, when it comes to cognition, if you subscribe PAJ, preschool children are categorized as the pre-operational stage, and they start, internalizing actions. They perform actions mentally, use symbols such as words and images, and they also start applying logics, although they are by and large, still need a concrete, it's still very concrete and intuitive. When it comes to language development, there is a rapid expansion of lexical knowledge, and they also develop basic grammar. When it comes to social skills and emotion, self-awareness is going to be increasingly noticeable, and they start showing empathy and understanding of others' feelings. And then behaviors of play became more and more social, and it's also the key to their learning. So there's lots of developmental changes going on, and this is our target population. So before we proceed, we want to remind ourselves of the critical components of communication. In my view, there are at least three elements: embodiment, social interaction, and affect. I believe that we need to keep that in mind when we think about successful communication, regardless of digital use. So let's take a look at them one by one. First, centrality of embodiment, namely the role of human bodies in language use. So when we have a conversation, we know that the nonverbal information is critical. Gestures, back channel behaviors like nodding and so forth, and eye gazing. And these nonverbal information is really critical. So if somehow the use of body is hindered in communication, we feel very uncomfortable and potentially negatively impact our communication quality. And human bodies play an important role in reading and writing as well. So you may remember that before the exam, you use by hand and write things down to memorize terms and concepts for the exam. When we read on paper, we often use our hands unconsciously. For example, we stick a finger between pages so that we can turn the next page efficiently. A finger often induces your eye movement when reading. And of course, we know that the children often point the text when they read. So how to use your body really influence your quality of reading. So the use of digital technology should not deprive us of the use of our bodies. So don't turn off your video at the Zoom meeting. You can turn it off now, but when we have a discussion time, please turn on your video. The second critical element is that we use language in social interaction. So as we are going to see shortly, babies and young children do not pick up language very much by just watching videos and reading digital books alone. So having interaction with others around the videos or digital books is critically important for them to develop language. That central meaning or the purpose of language activities is to interact with others. So it is important to make use of two-way interaction for language learning and instruction. Now, the third point is that we use language not only for the transmission of information, but also for the expression of emotion. So we use language primarily because we want to share our emotions, feelings, and other affects. So currently, AI researchers try to understand human emotion and incorporate it into AI technology so that AI can read human emotion and respond to it accordingly. But it turns out that reading human emotion is not easy. The relationship between people's facial expressions or the tone of voices, etc., and the emotional state is very, very complicated. So children take a long time to learn how to read others' emotions. Moreover, interestingly, language learning is facilitated when we have a positive feelings. Like, for example, students who watch, couple of minutes of videotapes, video clips that make them feel happy, that will facilitate their language learning. So role of emotion is quite important for language use and language learning. So when we use digital technologies, if these elements, embodiments, social interaction, and affect, these elements are not sufficiently secured, we cannot expect to have a positive effects on children's communication and their language development. So this is something that we want to keep in mind. Okay, so we can move on to the second section. What do we know about the effectiveness of digital technologies for young children's language learning? Now, for the sake of time, I'm going to focus on three major types of digital technologies today that seems to be very popular among young learners. One, screen media. Two, digital books. And three, social robots and AI. Now, before looking into previous studies, I'd like to briefly mention a theoretical framework that many studies are cited. That is Mayer's cognitive theory of multimedia learning. So based on this theory, there are two assumptions in this theory. First one is visual and audio information is processed separately. Second, each channel has limited cognitive capacity to handle information at any given moment. So in order to maximize the efficacy of information processing, we should minimize unnecessary cognitive load for each channel. Well, this has a lot of implication when you work with children because, compared with adults, they have a limited cognitive capacities. So we want to make sure that a cognitive load required by the digital technology use does not exceed children's cognitive capacity. We also need to pay attention to the balance, between the children's cognitive capacity and the cognitive load that the technology requires. So let's take a look at the screen media. The literature shows that the effectiveness of screen media differs by children's age. So for infants or very young children, younger than 2 years old, screen media does not seem to be effective. It requires too much cognitive load that the infants can handle. And this phenomena is often referred to as a video deficit. But the reason for the video deficit are not totally clear yet. But one possible explanation is that children usually have a very difficult time in converting two-dimensional information into three-dimensional information. So the screen media carries two-dimensional information. But in reality, we live in the world of three-dimensional information. So you have to convert two-dimensional information into three-dimensional information to make sense of the information that you see on the screen media. And young learners, young children younger than 2, still have a difficult time in doing so. And research also shows that lexical learning via screen media was not as good as in-person learning among this age group, and also limited effects on phonemic awareness in second language or foreign language. But in addition to cognition, there are some social and emotional developments and other health-related concerns. For example, the American Academy of Pediatrics announced new recommendation for children's media use in 2020. And according to them, for children under the age of 19 months, avoid using screen media. Now, a little bit older children, older than 2 years old or pre-primary children, the picture seems to be a little bit more promising. Screen media can be effective, but there are certain conditions. If it directs attention to the learning targets, or the content is age appropriate, So it should not be too complex or no overload the learner's cognitive capacity, as I repeated many times by now. And it can have a sufficient interaction with others. This is very critical. So we want to make sure that the children can have a joint attention, having eye contact with humans, or asking questions. It turns out the quality and timing of questions seems to be more important than the amount of questions and modeling and so forth. But negative effects due to the long screen media time. So longer screen time often means that it deprives children of opportunities to interact with adults and other humans. So what we learned from previous literature is that basically simply providing children with screen media would not work well, that children will not necessarily pick up language well, especially the children younger than 2. If the children are older than 2, there are certain conditions have to be met. And this general picture applies to both first language and additional language learners. Then what about digital books or ebooks? The definition of digital books is that a digital form of a book with features compatible to those of a traditional print book, but with unique digital features. So digital books are not just the simply, the virtual version or digital version of printed books. It usually have a unique digital features, multimodal features. Then what about effectiveness of these digital picture books or digital books? It depends on various factors. Generally speaking, people found a positive effect on children's language development, particularly in vocabulary learning. There are some inconsistent results in code-related skills and comprehension, but it might be something to do with the fact that we still don't have enough studies on these domains. Across studies, and there are substantial differences in effect sizes. And I also add that, most studies concern ebooks or digital books in English language, an alphabetical language with deep orthography. So we need to have more information on other languages. Now, extra features such as illustrations, animations, background music, sound effects, and hotspots and so forth, these extra features can be useful if they are congruent with the story. So for example, if you have an illustration which carries a way too much detailed information that is not relevant to the storyline, they could be potentially a distractor. So excessive or incongruent visual and audio information may hinder the children's comprehension. Now, exciting news for us is that second language or foreign language learners can potentially benefit more than L1 learning children. So features such as multimodal input or self-pacing, you can read on your own pace, or repetition, you can repeat many times, or highlighting with narrations and instant feedback. All these features can meet the specific needs of L2 and foreign language learners. But on the other hand, interactive and entertainment features such as games and hotspots may easily distract children's attention from comprehending the story itself. And we have to remember that processing in L2 or FL is more cognitively taxing. And joint reading with adults is more effective than reading digital books alone. Now, social robots and AI. So what are social robots? They are physical digital agents that are designed to interact with humans by adopting human behaviors. Some of you might wonder why I'm talking about social robots. One of my colleagues, Ben, she is an AI specialist. She told me that it is hard to predict the future, but there's one thing that she can say with confidence. That is social robots will come into the classroom in a couple of years. In fact, I already saw some classrooms both at the preschool and primary school level with social robots already. So they're coming. Now, they're increasingly seen as a way to assess preschool children's first language and second language and foreign language. So there are some merits in terms of nonverbal functions, joint attention, gestures, feedbacks, semantic contingencies, and affect supports. They can have that functions. Or it can potentially can have personalized or individualized interaction. And then physical embodiment. Children prefer to work with a robot, say compared with avatars, because they can physically touch the robot. But what about their effectiveness in terms of language learning? We still need to have a lot more research because we have very limited research at this point. But such limited research suggests that it can improve children's motivation and engagement. Some positive effect for vocabulary learning, but may not be a large gain among preschool students. But again, we don't have enough research and there are variability in robots' functions and implementations. When it comes to reading and grammar, we still have mixed results, and so we don't have a very clear picture about them. Now, the children's perception of social robots, they tend to differ by age and experience. This is very interesting. So Williams and colleagues, 2019, found that 4-year-old preschool students perceived social robots as a toy and 6-year-olds as a human-like agent. This is probably something to do with a theory of mind. And on top of that, the children who perceived social robots as a toy and as a less smart tended to have a small gains in their language gains. Another study shows that 3 to 4-year-old cannot make use of eye gazing with social robots. So that doesn't seem to be a very promising. But again, we need more information. What is not understood well include the effect of robots' gestures, verbal feedback from social robots, and the role of the quality of interaction between children and social robots. And we have a lot of questions. But in essence, not all digital technologies are equally and automatically effective. Then how should we use digital technologies appropriately and also ethically? So I'd like to move on to the third section, which concerns ethical and practical considerations. Now, when we think about research involving digital technology, there's something that we want to remember. That is, virtual environments involve new and dynamic cultures. So it's a very dynamic new cultures, and a lot of practices that we take for granted in real context may or may not apply to virtual environments. So that's something that we want to keep in mind. Now, that when the target group is children, there are further complications. So Ana Maria Pinto and I edited the book recently, and then we asked child language study experts to share their concerns when conducting research. And then 4 major concerns emerged in their experiences. So today I will add one more and discuss the 5 concerns in total and focusing on the use of digital technology. So these 5 concerns include 1, children's privacy and the balance between protection and surveillance. 2, children's agency and voices. How do we respect their agency and listen to their voices? Number 3, children's benefits, securing the quality of interaction. Number 4, developmental and ethical appropriateness. Number 5, digital divide and equity issue. So first, children's privacy and the balance between protection and surveillance. Now, digital tools produce various types and then also massive amount of data on children's usage, language use, on responses and behaviors. Now, it's important that children are not able to consent. Oh, by the way, consent means the agreement by those who can take a legal responsibility. That's different from assent. Assent is agreement by those who can't take a legal responsibility, including children. So children are not able to consent. So parents or guardians, they have responsibilities. In many contexts, and then also depending on the children's age, researchers may still need to obtain a children's assent. If children can assent, we need to ensure that children fully understand the purpose of the study, what they're asked to do, and their rights, and so forth. And then researchers try different techniques, such as using some images or developmentally appropriate languages in the assent forms, and so forth. But in reality, it is not easy to do it. So we really need to pay attention to children's verbal and nonverbal responses, and constant monitoring is also necessary. It is really hard for children to say no to teachers and parents, right? Or even more difficult to say, I no longer want to do this, and things like that. So this is very, very challenging for researchers. And if you collect data in virtual spaces, such as online survey data, and it's really difficult because you can't observe children in person. Now, we tend to record a lot of data nowadays, and in recorded data, there's a risk of children being monitored. So there are some private issues around here. Now, some people might be interested in using publicly available SNS data, but this is a gray area. This is a very controversial. And since children cannot consent, so public for adults may not be public for children. So some people, may argue, depending on the content of the SNS, some people can argue that it could be an invasion of children's privacy. Now, some people might collect and decode data in children's homes. Then we need to be mindful that, there are probably unpredictable incidents, that might happen, such as behaviors of known participants and so forth. Or the recording may capture some information that is irrelevant to the study, such as in children homes SES-related information. So what are you going to do with it? That's a very complicated question. Now, if you collect data through online, we need to understand the oversights of parents and guardians, and then also issue of reactivity. So for example, when my colleagues and I conducted an online survey due to the outbreak of COVID-19, we learned later that children did not have their own cell phones or laptops and PCs. So they had to use their parents' devices. So the parents are probably sitting next to the children, So their presence may influence the children's survey responses. So that's the issue of reactivity. To be honest, I don't know. There's probably very little to do for us, but I think it's important to be aware of that potential reactivity issue. And then also protection of children's privacy. For example, if children's game playing behaviors may violate their family game playing policies, you may invade the children's privacy. In addition, culture issues. There are some cultural differences in conceptualizing children's and then also children's rights. Like one time, and I conducted a research in China, the assent form for children that I was required by my own institution in the US had a line, something like, I talk it over with your parents, but you can make your own decisions, and something like that. And the principal of the participating primary school did not like it. And so according to him, in China, children should listen to their parents and teachers all the time. And asking children to assent it will be against their educational philosophy, and also it will confuse children. So I had to negotiate with the LIB in my own institution, and back and forth and back and forth. And in the end, I ended up having something like this. Like, if you don't want to be in this study, you do not have to participate. Remember, being in this study is up to you, and no one will be upset if you don't want to participate, or even if you change your mind later and want to stop. But to be honest, I'm not quite sure if this sufficiently responds to the local concern or not. The second ethical issue is how to respect a children's agency and listen to their voices. Children may start using digital technology from very early stage in their lives, but they may or may not really understand what they're doing, right? So what is their agency when they're asked to use digital technology in research? They might be quite vulnerable in that respect. So young children are still developing their understanding of digital technology, and younger children tend to treat, for example, AI agents as friends. I have a case when a second grade girl, she started talking about very private issue with an AI agent, something like very emotional issues with her mother. What would you do when this happens? That was happening in English class. It's nothing to do with the kind of the research topic that we're interested in, but she started talking about very complicated, touchy, emotional issues with her mom to the AI agent. So what are you going to do with that? And then to what extent do we listen to their voices? Importantly, having an interview itself is not automatically a solution because there is an inherent power imbalance between adults and children. So O'Kane says the biggest challenge for researchers working with children are the disparities in power and status between adults and children. Then how to deal with it? Perhaps one of the popular strategies for these power disparities is that researchers take on the role of participant observer, or what Mandel called the least adult role, and by transforming themselves to be more like a children. But Lafferty criticized such approaches as, quote, minimizing social difference strategies. because they persist in viewing differences between children and adults as a somewhat static and universal across context. And at the same time, viewing these social differences from the perspective of adults. So in the end, nothing was solved, according to Lafferty. Gallagher further questioned prevailing assumption that power is something possessed by a certain group of or individuals, such as adults, and needs to be reduced, negated, or worked around. And Gallagher further proposed a revised model of power that must be able to acknowledge the existence of multiple shifting relations of power between researchers and children, teachers and pupils, amongst peers, between children of different ages and genders, and so forth. Now, in other words, power is perceived as fluid and dynamic rather than static and then possessed by a certain group of people. Now, incorporating such flexibility in the research design is quite challenging, I must say. And this may not work very well all the time, but probably I believe it is worth pursuing if possible. So my position is a power imbalance exists. I admit that, but we can conceptualize it something relatively dynamic. So we can respect the children's expertise, knowledge, and experience. So when it comes to digital related research on children, it could be a good opportunity for children to bring their expertise as digital users because they have been exposed to digital technology for a long time since they're very young. This line of conceptualization copes well with research with children. And the dominant approaches in child studies, research on or research about children have been dominant. So in research on children, children are often perceived as research objects, and then people give children some sort of measurement and controlled experiments. That could be a typical research on children. And research about children, children are perceived as research subjects. So ethnographer observe and interpret children's behavior from adults' perspectives. Now, research with children as social actors or even co-researchers. And so the researchers try to give greater autonomy to children. So this type of research is one way to incorporate their views in understanding the issues in question. Now, when it comes to early language education, you notice that that young children may be treated as a commercial product. So we have to ask ourselves, if we respect their agency and interest rather than a commercial target. There are many ads, and then these are some of the ads that my students collected from all over the world. The first one came from Japan, and it says this is targeted at 0-year-old infants, and it says English debut. So from 0-year-old, why don't you learn English? The second one is an immersion program, which is increasingly popular in foreign language learning contexts as well. And these kind of ads really stimulate parents' aspiration to raise their children as global elites, right? So really typical commercialization. So can we incorporate their views in designing digital apps and tools, and how best to do so? We haven't really done it sufficiently, and these are potential research direction that people might want to take. Number three ethical issues, children's benefits, securing the quality of interaction. So does digital technology displace or reduce their interaction with others? That could be dangerous if it happens. So be aware of long screen time. The research, as we talked about already, research has shown that a longer screen time has negative impacts on language development, and then also they have some health issues. Now, dialogic questioning was found to be effective when viewing screen media. Um, it has three different steps. The first step is guiding children's attention, so such as modeling how to pay attention to the screen. And second step goes assisting children's cognitive processing, so providing WH prompts concerning who, what, when, where, and why. And the last step, providing social feedback, repeating the content, providing additional background information, making connection with the child's existing knowledge, and so forth. So you are doing all this dialogic questioning while the children and adults co-viewing that screen media. But be careful, background viewing, that means basically when the child engages in an activity like, playing with a toy, while others watch TV or videos in the same space, like a same room, that can have a negative impact. There are so many language learning apps for children, both L1 and L2 and FL, but most are designed to solo learning, not two-way interaction. It's not designed for having a two-way interaction. Their effectiveness is hardly evaluated in any systematic way. Parents and teachers often have to invest time in searching for appropriate apps. The fourth ethical issue is developmental and ethical appropriateness. So digital tools developmentally appropriate for children. How about culture and linguistic appropriateness? We really keep asking ourselves. And nowadays, and there are more and more digital tools incorporating AI. We have a lot of questions around that. Are the algorithm transparent? Are the algorithm validated for children ages? And what biases may they carry? And who should take responsibility if AI provides erroneous feedback or inappropriate content? Finally, digital divide and equity. We know that not all children have equal access to digital devices, reliable internet connections, and adult supervision and scaffolding. But importantly, not only the access, we tend to pay attention to the access issue, but also the quality of technology use is also very, very important as well. The disparities are getting worse as we increasingly depend on digital technology for learning and teaching, and different languages may be underrepresented in digital content. So this may exclude some children systematically. So that's something that we also want to remember. Also, as we increasingly use AI, we may wonder if we will eventually speak like an AI or write like an AI. For example, there are many pronunciation AI apps for children's foreign language learning. Our verbal production is getting uniformed in some way or not. Does this potentially devalue or lose diversity? This is an empirical question, but it's also a critical question to ask. So in conclusion, I talked about three critical components for communication: embodiment, social interaction, and affect. And we want to really secure them when we use digital technology for communication. I also talk about 5 ethical concerns: children's privacy and balance between protection and surveillance, children's agency and listening to their voices, and children's benefits, securing the quality of interaction, developmental and ethical appropriateness, and then digital divide and equity issue. So in essence, it's not like digital technology is effective or not. how to use digital technology or how to not to use digital technology. This is what matters. And to be effective, reflection is very important. Researchers need flexibility to make an optimal balance when they face dilemmas. So this is the end of my talk. Thank you for your attention.